The wrench slipped, and Danny Harlow caught it before it hit the floor grating. He wiped the grease off on his sleeve and went right back to tightening the corroded coolant valve. Down here in the engine bay of the driftline, the air always tasted like copper and old heat. Most of the crew avoided this part of the ship. Danny practically lived in it. Sato sat on an overturned crate nearby, his armored plates clicking together every time he shifted. The little Brevian was supposed to be helping, but he had not touched a single tool in the last hour. "So you're telling me," Sato said, leaning forward with wide black eyes, "that on Earth, there's a fish that walks on land?" "Mud skipper," Danny said without looking up. "Yeah, ugly little thing. Flops around in the mud. Why does it leave the water? Food. Territory. Same reason anything does anything." Sato's plates rattled with excitement. "Your planet is insane, Danny." Danny grinned. He had heard that a lot since joining this crew 8 months ago. He was the only human aboard the Driftline, a mid-class freight hauler running cargo through the Riven Corridor trade route. The ship was old. The hull had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. But she flew, and the crew was good, and Danny had learned to love every rattling, groaning inch of her. The rest of the crew had taken some time to get used to him. Gelvani, Brevians, Tavari. None of them had worked alongside a human before. Captain Fundisari, the old Gelvani who ran the ship, had accepted Danny's application with visible reluctance. Humans were still new to the galactic shipping lanes, and their reputation was strange. Class 7 Deathworlders, a species from a planet with crushing gravity, extreme weather, and predators on every continent. Most aliens did not know what to make of that, but Danny was quiet, hardworking, and good with engines. Over the months, the crew had warmed to him. Sato had become his closest friend, following him around the ship, asking endless questions about Earth. Naali, the Tavari navigation officer with soft brown feathers, would sometimes bring him dried fruit snacks from her homeworld. Even Rula, the senior Gelvani medic, had stopped flinching every time Danny did something that would have killed anyone else on the crew. That had been a funny day. 3 months in, Danny had grabbed a steam pipe barehanded when it came loose during a pressure spike. He held it in place for 6 seconds while Sato sealed the valve. When he let go, his palm was red and blistered. He wrapped it in a strip of cloth and kept working. Rula had appeared 20 minutes later with a medical scanner and a look on her face like she had just watched someone walk off a cliff and survive. She scanned his hand, filed an official injury report, and told him that what he had done was medically impossible for 11 of the 13 known spacefaring species. Danny had laughed and told her she should see what happens when a human touches a hot stove as a kid. She did not find it funny. Now, Danny finished the last valve and stood up, stretching his back. The engine hummed around him, a deep and steady sound that he had come to find comforting. He patted the wall like he was patting a horse. The intercom crackled. Captain Fun's calm, measured voice filled the bay. "All crew, this is the captain. We are entering a low-density asteroid microfield along our current heading. Standard procedure. Shields are active. No course change required. Continue normal operations." Sato hopped off his crate. Asteroid field. Boring. Danny nodded. Microfields were common in the Riven Corridor. Tiny rocks, most no bigger than a fist, bouncing off the shields like rain on a tin roof. Nothing dangerous dot up on the navigation deck. Naali's feathered fingers moved across her console. She paused. A small energy fluctuation had appeared on her readings, coming from somewhere near the rear engine housing. She watched it for a moment. It pulsed once, then disappeared. Sensor noise. The asteroid interference always caused little blips like that. She logged it out of habit and moved on. Down in the engine bay, Danny was packing up his tools when he stopped. He stood very still. His boots were flat on the floor grating, and through them, he felt something. A vibration. Not the normal hum of the engine. Something different. Something uneven, like a heartbeat that skipped. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the floor plate. There was again a faint, irregular pulse coming from somewhere beneath him, somewhere near the engine core chamber. He looked at Sato. "You feel that?" Sato tilted his head and pressed one clawed foot against the floor. His armored body was built for carrying heavy loads. not for detecting subtle vibrations. He shook his head. Feel what? Danny stayed crouched for a long moment, his hand pressed to the metal, his eyes unfocused. The vibration came again. Faint. Wrong. Probably nothing, he said quietly. But he did not believe that. Danny Harlow had spent 4 years welding pipes on deep-sea rigs in the North Atlantic before he ever set foot on a spaceship. He had learned a long time ago that when a machine started whispering something wrong, you listened. He stood up slowly and looked toward the sealed door that led to the engine core chamber. Behind that door, the plasma engine burned at temperatures that could melt almost anything in the known galaxy. The vibration pulsed again beneath his feet. Something was wrong with the heart of the ship. Nobody else on the drift line could feel it. Danny had asked 3 different crew members on his way up to the bridge, and all 3 had looked at him like he was imagining things. The Giovanni sensor tech had even run a quick diagnostic on the engine core housing. It came back clean, every reading normal, every number in the green. Captain Fundisari sat in his command chair, his long blue fingers folded neatly in his lap. He listened to Danny's report with the patience of someone who had captained ships for 40 years. When Danny finished, Finn gave a slow nod. The diagnostic shows nothing, Danny. Sensor interference from a microfield can cause phantom vibrations in the lower hull plating. It is a known effect. Captain, I have felt phantom vibrations before. This is not that. The machine says the engine is fine. The machine is wrong. Finn studied him for a moment. There was no hostility in the old captain's expression, but there was no urgency either. I appreciate your instincts, but I cannot order a full engine shutdown based on a feeling. We are on schedule. Continue monitoring and report if anything changes. Danny left the bridge with a knot in his stomach. He had worked with machines his entire life. On Earth, on oil rigs, on cargo ships crossing the Atlantic in winter storms. Machines talk to you if you knew how to listen. And right now, the drift line was trying to tell him something that he did not go back to his bunk. Instead, he grabbed a handheld thermal scanner from the tool locker and went below deck on his own time. The lower corridor was empty. Most of the crew had no reason to come down here. The lighting was dim, the air was warm, and the constant hum of the engine made the walls vibrate like the inside of a drum. Danny reached the outer inspection panel of the engine core housing and removed it with a hand wrench. Behind the panel was a secondary thermal layer, a thick shell of heat-resistant alloy that wrapped around the plasma core like a cocoon. He pressed the thermal scanner against it and swept it slowly across the surface. Normal, 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 then a spike. A thin line of elevated heat running diagonally across the shell. He followed it with the scanner, and his blood went cold. A hairline fracture, barely visible to the naked eye, running along the inner thermal layer of the containment shell. The standard sensors had not caught it because they only measured the outer shell. This crack was on the inside, hidden beneath layers of insulation that the diagnostic never penetrated. Danny pulled out his communicator and did some quick math. The asteroid microfield was generating tiny resonance impacts against the shields. The shields absorbed them easily, but the vibrations were transferring through the hull structure and into the engine housing. Each micro-impact was putting stress on the fracture. Each one was making it a little longer. He estimated 6 hours before the fracture reached critical length. When that happened, the containment shell would split open and the plasma engine core would be exposed. Superheated plasma would flood the lower deck corridor. The medical bay was down here. The cargo holds were down here. The crew quarters were down here. Everything within 30 meters of the core would reach temperatures higher than the surface of a star. Danny ran. He reached the bridge in under a minute, breathing hard. Captain Finn looked up, and this time, the old Giovanni saw something in Danny's face that made him sit forward. The containment shell has a fracture on the inner thermal layer, Danny said. Hairline, growing. The microfield vibrations are feeding it. We have maybe 6 hours, probably less. Finn did not hesitate. He turned to Ollie at the navigation console. Plot an immediate exit course from the microfield. Fastest safe route. Naali's feathered hands danced across her controls. 90 minutes to clear the field on the shortest heading. Captain, do it. Full speed. The ship groaned as it changed course. Danny felt the engines push harder, and he winced. More power meant more heat inside the core. More heat meant more stress on the fracture. Rula appeared on the bridge. She had heard the alert tone and come up from the medical bay. Her translucent blue skin shifted to a lighter shade as she read the tension in the room. "What is happening?" she asked. Danny looked at her. "The engine containment shell is cracking. If it breaks open, the plasma core will be exposed." "What does that mean for the crew?" Danny chose his words carefully. "It means everything on the lower deck gets cooked. Instantly. Temperatures that no living thing can survive." Rula's four-fingered hands tightened at her sides. She looked at Captain Fun, then back at Danny. "How certain are you?" "I held the scanner against the crack myself. It is real." The bridge went quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the faint patter of microasteroids bouncing off the shields. 90 minutes. That was how long they needed to get clear. Then, from somewhere deep below their feet, a sound rose through the ship. A low, grinding groan like metal bending under enormous pressure. It lasted 3 seconds and then stopped. Every person on the bridge looked down at the floor. Danny felt his mouth go dry. The fracture was not going to wait 6 hours. It was not going to wait 90 minutes. The crack was growing faster than he had calculated, and the ship was running out of time. "Captain," Danny said quietly, "we have a problem." The alarm was not like the ones Danny knew on Earth. There was no blaring horn, no flashing red light. The Gelvani designed their emergency systems to chime, a series of high, sharp tones that repeated in a pattern. It was supposed to be calming. It was not. The containment shell had cracked open along a 2-meter seam. Plasma light, white and blinding, bled through the floor grating of the lower corridor like sunlight cutting through a cracked door. The temperature on the lower deck jumped 40 degrees in under a minute. Captain Finn's voice came through every speaker on the ship. "All crew, evacuate to upper decks immediately. Lower corridor is to be sealed." This is not a drill. Danny was already moving. He had been halfway down the lower corridor when the breach happened, close enough to feel the heat roll over him like opening an oven door. His skin prickled. His eyes watered. He turned and ran toward the nearest access ladder. Ahead of him, he saw Naali stumbling out a side passage. The Tavari navigation officer had been retrieving a backup data chip from a storage room near the engine section. Her brown feathers were curling at the tips, singeing from the rising heat. Her species had almost no tolerance for high temperatures. She was already struggling to breathe. Danny did not slow down. He reached her in 4 strides, scooped her up with both arms, and carried her to the ladder. She weighed almost nothing. Her feathered body shook against his chest as he climbed, one rung at a time, until they reached the upper deck. He set her down gently against the corridor wall, and she gasped in the cooler air. "Stay here," he said. The upper deck was controlled chaos. Crew members were moving quickly, sealing hatches and rerouting power away from the lower sections. Sato came barreling around a corner, his armored plates rattling. "Danny, 3 cargo bays are locked down with emergency seals, but those seals are rated for fire, not plasma. I give them 20 minutes before they fail." 20 minutes, Danny repeated. "Maybe less." The temperature down there is climbing fast. Rula had already set up a triage station in the main corridor of the upper deck. 2 crew members had minor burns from the initial heat surge, a Gelvani sensor tech with blistered fingers and a Brevian loader with a scorched arm plate. Rula moved between them with quick, precise hands, her translucent skin pale with stress, but her voice steady. Danny found Captain Fun at the emergency console near the bridge. The old captain's face was tight, his blue skin darker than usual, which Danny had learned was a sign of deep worry in Gelvani. "Status," Danny said. "The fracture has opened to a full breach. Plasma is venting into the lower corridor at increasing volume. If it continues, it will reach the cargo bay seals in approximately 15 minutes. After that, it spreads to crew quarters and life support systems. Can we vent the plasma into space?" The emergency venting system requires activation from the engine bay control panel, which is currently inside the breach zone. Danny stared at the schematic display on the console. The engine bay was glowing red on the screen. The plasma core sat at the center, and the cracked containment shell was drawn as a broken circle around it. He studied it for a long moment. "There is another option," he said slowly. "The containment shell has a manual override. If someone physically pushes the cracked segment back into the housing clamp and engages the magnetic lock by hand, the shell reseals. The automated coolant system kicks in, and the plasma is contained again." Fun looked at him. "The engine bay is currently at 900 degrees. I know. No species on this ship can survive that. The galactic standard survival threshold for brief heat exposure is approximately 120 degrees. 900 degrees will kill any living crew member before they take 3 steps. Gelvani survival threshold," Danny said quietly. "Not human." The bridge went silent. Sato, who had followed Danny, stood frozen with his mouth open. Naali, still recovering against the wall nearby, turned her head slowly to look at him. "Danny," Rula said from behind him. She had come up from the triage station. "I heard what you said. You cannot be serious. 900 degrees will kill you. Humans have survived short exposure to temperatures over 200 degrees. Our skin burns, but our organs keep working longer than any other species in the galactic database. If I move fast enough, I only need to be in the hottest zone for about 3 seconds. 3 seconds at 900 degrees. 3 seconds to reach the clamp. Maybe 5 to engage it. Then I get out. That is 8 seconds in lethal heat. I know what it is." Nobody spoke. The alarm chimes continued their steady, useless pattern. Somewhere below them, the ship groaned again, louder this time, metal warping under heat it was never designed to hold. Danny walked to a storage locker on the upper deck and pulled it open. Inside were cargo blankets, welding aprons, and a canister of industrial coolant gel. He began wrapping his arms in coolant-soaked rags. He pulled on his heaviest work gloves. He draped a cargo blanket over his shoulders and soaked it in gel until it dripped. Rula watched him with wide, unblinking eyes. Her translucent skin had gone almost white. Danny looked at her and said the only thing he could think of: "Have burn treatment ready." Sato blocked the corridor with his body. For a Brevian, he was not very big, but his armored plates were locked tight and his clawed feet were planted on the floor like he had been welded there. "No," Sato said. "You are not doing this." Danny looked down at his friend. The coolant gel was already drying on his wrapped arms. The cargo blanket over his shoulders was heavy and dripping. His boots were the thickest pair he owned, deep-sea welding boots from Earth that had survived the North Atlantic. They would not survive this, but they would buy him a few seconds. "Sato, move. You will die in there." "Maybe, but if I do not go in there, everyone on this ship dies for certain." "You, Rula, Naali, Captain Fun. Everyone." Sato's black eyes glistened. His plates rattled, not from excitement this time, but from something Danny had never seen in him before. Fear. Danny crouched down and placed one gloved hand on the top of Sato's armored head. The gesture was gentle, the way a man might touch a child he was trying to comfort. "I need you to do something for me," Danny said. "When I go through that door, you keep it open for exactly 15 seconds. You count to 15, and then you seal it. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see. At 15, you close that door. Do you understand?" Sato's voice cracked. 15 seconds. 15 seconds. "Promise me." "I promise." Danny stood up. He looked down the corridor toward the sealed hatch that led to the engine bay. Behind that door, the air was 900 degrees and climbing. Plasma light flickered through the seams of the hatch like white fire, trying to escape. That he rolled his shoulders. He took 3 deep breaths. On Earth, deep-sea welders learned breath control before they learned anything else. You fill your lungs. You slow your heart. You tell your body that what is about to happen is survivable, even when every part of your brain is screaming that it is not. "Open it," Danny said. Sato hit the release. The hatch slid open, and hell came through. The heat hit Danny like a solid wall. It was not like standing near a fire. It was not like opening an oven. It was like the air itself had turned into something that wanted to crush him. His cargo blanket began to smoke instantly. The coolant gel on his arms evaporated in a hiss of steam. Through the blinding white light of the exposed plasma core, he could barely see the outline of the containment shell and the manual clamp housing on the far side of the bay. 12 meters. That was all. 12 meters there and 12 meters back. Danny ran. The floor burned through his boots in the first 3 steps. He felt the soles soften and stick to the grating. His cargo blanket caught fire on his back, and he shrugged it off without stopping. The welding apron underneath was already blackening. The skin on his face tightened as if it were shrinking against his skull. He could not breathe. The air was too hot to pull into his lungs. So he held the breath he had taken and kept moving till he reached the containment shell. The cracked segment was right in front of him, a 2-meter slab of alloy that had buckled outward from the pressure. Plasma light poured through the gap like liquid sun. He could feel it cooking his chest through the apron. Danny grabbed the edge of the cracked segment with both hands. His gloves disintegrated on contact. They did not burn slowly or melt away. They simply ceased to exist, and his bare palms closed around metal that was glowing white-hot. The pain was instant and absolute. It went beyond anything he had ever felt. It went beyond what his brain could process. His hands were burning, the skin blistering and splitting and fusing to the metal, and a scream tore out of him that he could not stop, but he did not let go till he pulled. The segment resisted. He planted his melting boots on the floor, grating, and pulled harder, putting his legs and back into it, using every bit of strength that his gravity-cursed, death-world-born body could produce. The segment groaned and shifted. It moved 1 inch, then 2. Then it slid back into alignment with a deep metallic clang that echoed through the bay. The magnetic clamp housing was to his right. A manual lever designed to be pulled by Gelvani hands in a controlled maintenance environment. Danny reached for it with his right hand. His fingers were destroyed. He could see bone through the charred skin. He could not feel them anymore, which was somehow worse than the pain that he hooked what was left of his hand around the lever and slammed it down. The magnetic clamp engaged. The containment shell locked into place with a deep, resonant thud. The plasma light dimmed. Emergency coolant flooded the bay from ceiling vents, and the temperature began to drop. Danny turned. His vision was blurred. His arms were burned to the elbows. Steam was rising from his entire body. He could smell his own skin. 12 meters back to the door that he walked. He could not run anymore. His boots had melted into the grating, and each step was a tearing, grinding effort. But he walked. 1 step, then another, then another. Sato was counting. Danny could hear him through the roaring in his ears. 12, 13, 14. T14. Danny fell through the doorway and collapsed on the corridor floor. Sato sealed the hatch behind him at 15. Danny lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. His hands were smoking. His arms were black and red and wet. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Rula dropped to her knees beside him. Her medical scanner touched his chest, and the readings that filled her screen were readings she had never seen on any living patient in her entire career. That he was alive. He should not have been, but he was alive. Rula's hands would not stop shaking. She had been a medic for 19 years. She had treated plasma burns on Gelvani dock workers, frostbite on Tavari traders, shattered armor plates on Brevian miners. She had seen bodies broken in ways that most people could not imagine. None of it had prepared her for what was lying on the floor in front of her. Danny Harlow was conscious. That was the first impossible thing. His hands were destroyed. 3rd and 4th degree burns covered both of them from fingertip to wrist. On 3 fingers of his left hand, she could see bone. The skin had fused to itself in places, melted and reformed into something that no longer looked like living tissue. His arms were burned to the elbows, the flesh swollen and weeping and cracked like dry earth after a fire. Her scanner estimated burns across 40% of his body to be why every medical standard Rula had ever been taught. A body this damaged should have entered fatal shock within the first 2 seconds of contact with a containment shell. The nervous system should have shut down. The heart should have stopped. Pain alone should have killed him before his hands ever closed around the metal. Danny had held on for nearly 8 seconds. He looked up at her from the floor, his face tight with pain, his breathing shallow and rough. And the first thing he said was, Is the core holding? Rula could not answer. She just stared at him. Rula, the core. Is it holding? She checked her communicator with trembling fingers. The engine readings were stabilizing. The containment shell was sealed. The coolant systems were doing their job. It is holding, she said. Danny closed his eyes and let out a long, shaking breath. Good. Rula activated the emergency medical channel. I need assistance at upper corridor section 4. Burn trauma. Severe. Bring everything. 2 junior medics arrived within a minute. The first was a young Gelvani named Pell, still in his 2nd year of service. He came around the corner carrying a burn treatment kit and stopped dead. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stood there, frozen, staring at Danny's hands like he was looking at something that should not exist in the natural world. The second medic, a Gelvani woman named Desi, was more experienced. She had 7 years of field work. She stepped past Pell, knelt beside Danny, and began to open the treatment kit. Then she saw the hands up close. She saw the exposed bone. She saw the way the flesh had melted and reformed. Her hands stopped moving. She looked at Rula, and she whispered a single word in Gelvani. Hovani. It was an old word. It did not translate perfectly into common language. The closest meaning was impossible thing. Something that should not exist, but does. Something that breaks the rules of the universe simply by being real. Rula grabbed Desi's arm. Focus. He needs us now. Desi nodded and began unpacking the kit, but her hands were shaking as badly as Rula's. Pell still had not moved from the corner. He was staring at Danny's chest, rising and falling, watching a dead man breathe. Rula turned back to Danny and hit a wall she had not expected. Her burn treatments were designed for Gelvani physiology. Gelvani's skin, when exposed to extreme heat, simply died and fell away in thin, dry layers. It did not do what Danny's skin was doing. His tissue was blistering, weeping fluid, swelling, and even in its destroyed state, it was already beginning to mount some kind of biological response. His body was not giving up. It was fighting. Danny, she said carefully, I need to treat your burns, but my supplies are made for Gelvani patients. I do not know how human tissue will respond. Danny opened his eyes. His voice was rough and broken, but steady. Cool water first. Not cold. Cool. Run it over the burns to bring the temperature down. Then clean dressings loose, not tight. Do not break any blisters that are still intact. They are protecting the tissue underneath. Rula listened, and something inside her cracked. He was lying on the floor with his hands burned to the bone, and he was teaching her how to save him. Pain management, he continued. If you have anything that works on a mammalian nervous system, I will take it. Otherwise, I can hold. You can hold. I have been holding for the last 4 minutes. I can keep going. Rula sent Desi to get clean water. She sent Pell, who had finally unfrozen, to search the medical database for anything on human physiology. She began cutting away the remains of Danny's gloves and the fused cloth from his arms, working as gently as she could with tools that were designed for skin far more delicate than his. Danny flinched once. Just once. Then he went quiet and let her work. Captain Findasari appeared in the corridor doorway. The old Gelvani captain stood there for a long time, looking down at the human on the floor. His face showed nothing at first. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed the small pin from his collar. It was a captain's honor symbol, a Gelvani tradition given only to those who had shown extraordinary courage in the service of others. He knelt beside Danny and placed it on his chest, just above his heart. Danny looked at it, then looked at Fun. He did not have the strength to speak. He just nodded. The ship hummed around them. The engine held. The crew was alive that Danny's eyes fluttered closed, and Rula sat beside him in the quiet corridor, watching her scanner, counting his heartbeats, still unable to fully understand the creature that lay before her. 3 weeks felt like 3 months. Danny had decided that the worst part of healing was not the pain he could handle. He had been handling pain his whole life. The worst part was sitting still. The medical center at Orally Station was clean, bright, and designed for species that considered a mild sunburn a life-threatening emergency. Danny sat in a recovery chair by the window, his arms bandaged from fingertip to elbow, watching ships dock and depart through the wide viewport. He was the most interesting patient the station had ever received, and he hated every second of it. The Gelvani doctors visited him in pairs, sometimes in groups. They would stand at the foot of his bed, studying their data pads, murmuring to each other in low voices. They scanned his hands every morning, and every morning they found something new to be astonished by. His skin was growing back, not quickly, not smoothly. The new tissue was pink and raw and uneven, pulling tight across his knuckles and cracking when he tried to flex his fingers. It hurt in ways he did not have words for, but it was growing, cells dividing, tissue rebuilding, his body stitching itself back together from damage that would have been permanent and fatal in every other known species. One of the senior Gelvani doctors had already published a preliminary medical paper on it. Danny had not read it, but Sato told him it was titled Anomalous Tissue Regeneration in a Class 7 Death World Primate Following Extreme Thermal Exposure. Danny told Sato that was the worst title he had ever heard. Sato said the Gelvani were not known for their creativity. Sato visited every day. He came with whatever food he could find in the station market, most of it terrible, and sat on the end of Danny's bed for hours. He talked about the ship repairs, about the new containment shell being installed, about the Brevian cargo handler on the next dock who kept challenging him to arm wrestling contests. "I told him about you," Sato said one afternoon, his plates clicking with barely contained pride. "I told him you grabbed a plasma containment shell with your bare hands at 900 degrees and held it for 8 seconds. You did not need to tell him that. He did not believe me, so I showed him the medical report. He has not spoken to me since. I think he is afraid of humans now." Danny shook his head. "Great. That is exactly what we need. The crew has a name for you," Sato added, grinning in the way that Brevians grin, which involves showing all 40 of their small, flat teeth. "They're calling you Iron Hands. In Brevian, it sounds much better. Please stop. Iron Hands Danny. Danny of the Iron Hands. The human who would not let go. I'm going to throw this pillow at you." Sato ducked, laughing, his armor rattling like a bag of stones rolling down a hill. Rula came the next day. She was quieter than Sato. She always was. She sat in the chair beside Danny's bed and placed a data pad on the table between them. "I have submitted a formal request to the Galactic Medical Exchange for a complete human physiology database," she said. "Full anatomical reference, treatment protocols, pharmaceutical compatibility charts. Everything." Danny raised an eyebrow. "That is a big request. I watched you burn alive and then talked you through your own treatment because I did not know how to help you. That will not happen again. Not on my ship. Not to any human." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Rula, for keeping me alive." She looked at him with those large, dark Gelvani eyes. "You saved 12 lives, Danny. I only kept you breathing. Breathing is the important part." She almost smiled. For a Gelvani, that was practically laughing. Captain Finn came last. He walked in slowly, the way he did everything, and stood by the viewport with his hands folded behind his back. He looked out at the stars for a long time before speaking. "The Gelvani Shipping Authority has reviewed the incident report from the drift line," he said. "They have officially reclassified the human crew position from auxiliary labor to essential personnel." Danny blinked. "Essentiel personnel." It means better pay, better quarters, and a seat at the operations table during route planning. It also means that every mixed-species vessel in the Gelvani trade fleet will be encouraged to carry at least one human crew member. "Because of what I did. Because of what you are." Finn turned from the window and looked at Danny directly. "I was wrong to doubt having a human aboard my ship. I will not make that mistake again." Danny nodded. There was nothing else to say. Finn was not a man who gave compliments lightly, and Danny was not a man who needed them. "What do we ship out?" Danny asked. 2 weeks. I will be ready." From the doorway, Rula's voice cut in. "Absolutely not." Danny grinned. Finn almost did. That evening, after the visitors had gone and the station lights had dimmed to their night cycle, Danny sat alone by the viewport. His bandaged hands rested in his lap. They hurt. They would always hurt. The scars would never fully fade. He would never grip a wrench the same way again. But the ship was whole. The crew was alive, and somewhere down the corridor, he could hear Sato's voice, loud and cheerful, telling a group of strangers the story of the human who grabbed a blazing engine core with his bare hands and refused to let go. Far away, in her quarters aboard the driftline, Rula opened her personal medical log and typed a final entry. I have treated injuries across 9 species in my career. I have never treated anything like a human. They break, they burn, they bleed, and then, impossibly, they heal. I do not understand how their world made them this way. I'm only grateful that it did.